Cinemania Field Report, Reefer Madness. Have you ever noticed that you need to explain to your parents more and more that the cute video of a cat escaping a burning building and jumping down a waterfall to safety isn't real? How about headlines indicating that certain people in certain places may or may not be eating household pets? Isn't it strange how the most ridiculous, clearly fabricated stories can have a certain traction with people, especially when those stories are dire warnings about how everything is about to go wrong at any moment? Maybe there's just something in us that makes us think, well, I better believe it a little just in case it's true. We like to think we're smart people, and only dummies would get fooled by ranting news headlines or a clearly fake video, but the sad fact is, people aren't getting any dumber. This kind of thing has been going on a lot longer than people think, and one of the most infamous early examples of a moral panic warning about what those damn kids are getting up to nowadays was a little movie called, in only the most sober and best of taste, Reefer Madness. Well, I think most folks these days understand reefer madness to be a willfully dishonest portrayal of a mostly harmless drug. We here at the Cinemania Society like to analyze the deeper structures and social currents underpinning the emergence of films. Think of us as Narcan for Cinemania. Also, we're like cool about it, man. To begin, the effects of reefer madness as portrayed in the eponymous film are nothing compared to the dread scourge of Cinemania, which this film created on a societal and a generational scale. It has resulted in almost 90 years of propaganda and fear-mongering over what studies have shown is at least no more harmful than alcohol or tobacco, and may in fact be substantially less so. The moral panic over cannabis that Reefer Madness helped to create was so strong, in fact, that clinical study of the effects of the drug was banned for decades because it was supposedly so dangerous, which you may note conveniently locked anyone out of the ability to provide evidence that could disprove all those wild claims about dreaded marijuana. With that preamble out of the way, let's look at the actual film itself. It opens with syrupy music over title cards that explain twice that events in this film have been fictionalized, before insisting that its topic was inspired by actual research into marijuana, spelled with an H. This marks Reefer Madness as one of the first to ever claim the conceit of having been inspired by actual events. You know, like the 2022 film Cocaine Bear, and with as much relationship to reality. It's turgid, moralistic, and slow-paced, even by the standards of educational films from an era where people had much longer attention spans. We're talking about people who would sit down and listen to presidential speeches on the radio, by choice. It has the typical pieces of 30s moral turpitude, teenagers dancing the jitterbug and being depicted as draped over each other as suggestively as could be permitted under the Hays Code. But Hays Code or no, audiences could read between the lines. Their children were smoking dope and having sex. Such gasp. Very shocked. Wow. I mean, it's not like they themselves had ever done that, or that people had been finding ways to get skeezy on gooseberries and donkey stomp each other's fun zones since before we were even Homo sapiens. But since when have moralists ever given a shit? Hypocrisy is a standard tool of fascism, after all. Frankly, the film itself is a letdown. The history and cultural context around its release is the interesting part, man. So let's take a look at the year the film came out, shall we? 1936. It was an election year. Franklin D. Roosevelt was reaching the end of his first term because the business plot of 1933 had failed. Note, look that up. It'll blow your mind, man. Both the Great Depression and the moral panic over alcohol were finally weakening their grip over the United States due to some really smart and actually humane legislation that had pissed off the American right wing, fervently to the point where they actually really never stopped pissing them off. The people were fully behind the progressive policies FDR was wielding, and what the right wing really needed was a good old-fashioned moral panic to whip the American public into a frenzy, the currents of which would carry them to political victory. The US of A could finally install a strong leader, you know, like that guy who was running Italy. What a jawline. And that mustachioed German chancellor who really knew how to work the crowds. Say, did you know he's getting the trains to run on time? Spoiler alert, the only trains that were running on time were the ones to the death camps. But hey, fascists have long embraced fantasy over reality and ignoring convenient details like, you know, facts. An angry mob is an ugly thing, and it's about time we had one. And I'm certain that many of our listeners already know some of the general shape of things around what I'll call the Green Panic of the 1930s. William Randolph Hearst, whom Orson Welles lampooned in Citizen Kane, was a right-wing media mogul who sat atop a throne of yellow journalism, a man that had lied the Spanish-American War into existence, who was an unabashed enthusiasm of fascism, and one of the speculated heads of the business plot. Hearst not only stood to benefit politically from engineering a moral panic, he stood to make a lot of money while doing it. And what's more American than that? Like virtually all industrialists from the Gilded Age, Hearst didn't just own a shit ton of newspapers. Oh, no. Hearst owned the paper mills that made the newspapers, and he also owned vast tracts of the forest land and cotton plantations used to make all the products that went into the paper mills. To Hearst, if people were going to get all riled up by news rags that did to the truth what King Kong did to collections of fine porcelain, it was only smart to make a buck or two off the back of all the hoopla. Hemp had already been used for centuries in making rope, sailcloth, and clothing, but an innovation in the early 30s, the decorticator, made hemp viable as a substitute for wood pulp and cotton in making paper. And you know what that meant, dear listener? That meant competition. And if there's anything a monopolist hates more than anything, even more than regulation, it's competition. As a side note, hemp oil can also be used as a high-temperature machine lubricant, which also meant competition for the petroleum barons over at Standard Oil. By getting the public to support legislation banning one type of cannabis, Hearst and his industrialist allies could make sure all forms of cannabis were banned because it's really, really hard to tell the kind of cannabis you use industrially from the kind you smoke to cop a buzz. And if you grow one, you can usually grow the other. Readers of Hearst papers suddenly found sensationalized and highly exaggerated stories about marijuana criminals on the front page, but stories about far more common crimes like drunk driving fatalities were pushed to the back pages. And yes, I know one of the symptoms of marijuana use is paranoia, but this conspiracy is real, man. Just like the business plot, which... Oh, wait. Where was I? Listen, it's not paranoia about massive industrial conspiracies when those massive industries are being run by guys engaged in an actual conspiracy. When your super secret plans have their own Wikipedia page, it's time to accept that the cat is out of the bag and on the phone to the cops. And for every cat that escapes their fabricy prison, there's a bunch more suspiciously wriggling bags meowing in the corner. All this is to say that in this nexus of industrial profiteering and political power-mongering, marijuana emerged as an early front in what has become known as the culture war. Reefer Madness was just the opening bombardment. Even now, nearly a century after this film struck fear into the hearts of parents and provided legislators and cops a perennial excuse for sticking felonies on people they don't want voting, you know, poor folks and people of color, the battle over marijuana has evolved into the political equivalent of the Western Front. Battle lines have become frozen and deeply entrenched. One side or the other may occasionally launch an offensive, like the war on drugs in the 70s and 80s, or the state-level legalization of the aughts and teens, but it's never for very long and is eventually pushed back. Even as I write this in November of 2025, right-wing legislators have just passed laws that clamp back down on cannabis products, laws which began to loosen over the past 15 years or so. The culture war is eternal. Reefer Madness, indeed. This has been another Cinemania Field Report. This episode was written by Ethan Ireland and Andy Slack and was performed by Ethan Ireland. Incidental music and sound courtesy of Epidemic Sound.